Welcome to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. I'm Mike Roberts. This is Bill Barley. Of course, he's been telling us stories about gold trails and ghost towns and all sorts of places. You know, whenever they come up with a winner, they want to go back to it. I've got in my hand a prospectus for Cassiar gold mines. And look at the gold leaf around the edges, the gold. Now, this was nowhere near Cassiar.
Not really. It was quite a bit north of Cassiar in that Stewart Arm, Portland Canal area. But they wanted to use the word Cassiar, Mike, because it still had that golden ring, as you say.
How golden was it?
Very, very fascinating. And really, when you talk about Cassiar, you have to go right back to the early 1870s. And you're talking about two individuals who were really responsible for discovering a massive deposit of gold, placer gold in that area. And one of them was a guy called McCullough, Angus McCullough. The other was a French-Canadian called Henry Thibert. And they had met in the Mackenzie country about 1870. At that time, Thibert had a partner called Nackingus. Nackingus he was tired of following the rainbow. He was tired of it. He was beat mentally. He was beat physically. He turns and goes back east. These two meet, and they come to the same conclusion. They think that somewhere in that unmapped wilderness of northern British Columbia, and it was unmapped, Mike, they just didn't know exactly where they were going. There were rivers that were mapped. The Skeena was mapped, and the Stikine, but north of that, virtually unknown territory. They decided to strike out towards the west, and they slowly start making their way from the Mackenzie district, moving westward into British Columbia.
All right, we're heading into the Cassiar region today. Get out your gold pans. This is going to be good after this break. Welcome back. We're heading with McCullough and Thibert into an unexplored part of northwestern British Columbia. Yeah. I mean, and in 1870, a lot of people knew a lot of stuff about BC, but there was a lot of hazard associated with this kind of venture.
You bet there was. It's grizzly bear country. There are rivers. They didn't know whether there were falls on the rivers. It's very tough going. It's even tough going today, but in those days you had to follow the rivers and had to follow the creeks. There were no roads.
Yeah. What was their route in? Now, they come in via, what, the Liard?
Yeah, they come in, they go up the Liard, and they discover actually very, very good bar on the Liard. And this bar is so good, they name it McCullough's Bar. And a lot of miners would have stayed with it, but they had a dream, these guys. And they mined enough gold on the bar to make it go, and then they left McCullough's Bar. And then they get onto another river, and this is an unknown river, unnamed. Later it becomes the Dease. They ascend this river. They're going up this river, which is tough going as well.
And up the river on the Dease means heading south. They're heading
up
the river.
Generally south. That's right. And then they come to a huge lake, unnamed.
Right.
Later this is Dease Lake. And they have a choice. Go right on the west side, go left on the east side. They choose left.
On the east side.
That's right. And they go down the east side, and they pan a few creeks, and there's few indications, some colors, but not really enough to stay with, Mike. But they must have looked across the lake, and they see great cuts in the terrain across the lake, and they know there are creeks and some big creeks coming down on the western side. But they decide to keep on going. They're getting short of grub, so they keep on going, and they go down the Tanzilla River, and they come right down to the Stikine. And they know there's some miners on the Stikine, some more French Canadians. And so they go down to Buck's Bar, and this was named after a French Canadian called Buck Choquette. And the Stikine rush had been in the late 1860s and right into about, this is now 1872. Yeah. And so they're about 20 or 24 miners down there, eking out a living on the various bars on the Stikine. And they stay there for a while, and finally McCullough says, I think I'm going to go and see the provincial government and ask them to back a prospecting trip because I think that country we just came through has untold riches. Well, Thibert thinks so too, but they're about the only two that does.
Yeah.
So he catches a stern wheeler down to Victoria. And probably the stern wheeler he catches, we're not sure of this, but it's probably owned by a guy called Billy Moore, who is called the Flying Dutchman. Very, very gifted man, Mike. And I've brought him into other stories, and he is a stern wheeler captain. He goes down to Victoria, and of course McCullough goes along with him. They go to see the provincial government. They turn them down flat. They don't think there are any more gold discoveries in northern British Columbia. Caribou's been discovered in the Almanica, so there's no more as far as they're concerned. Mistake. So he retraces his steps, goes back up the inside passage with Captain Billy Moore, and Moore lets him off somewhere on the Stikine. It's early fall, but the unusual happens. An absolutely howling northern blizzard comes in the early fall, And he's making his way up towards...
This is McCullough making his way back up to Thibert or wherever he's going.
That's right, up to Buck's Bar. He's going into Buck's Bar. And he freezes to death on the banks of the Stickeen about 2 or 3 miles below Buck's Bar. He never does make it. And he never realizes his great dream. And so the winter passes, everyone's holed up at Buck's Bar, mostly French Canadians, and they stay there till the spring of 1873. And Thibert gets together about 4 or 5 other individuals, and they go up towards that unknown lake, and he takes a back route. And I assume that an Indian told him about the back route, because they go up the Tuya River, and they go up, and then they come down on the creek. And they come down on the center creek on that, actually a northern creek on that lake. And it's bonanza gold all the way. Some of the pans yield, Mike, 1/4 of a pound of gold. Now, when you get 2 pennyweight of gold...
That's 3 ounces of gold per pan.
That's right, because the troy pound is 12 ounces. You're right. It's 3 ounces per pan. Your pan is literally yellow in many places, and in fact, much of it. You would be astonished what that will do to the individual, and they knew they were on El Dorado ground, and were they on El Dorado ground? So immediately, they have brought enough provisions with them, they stay there, and they mine an average of 4 ounces a day per man with very primitive equipment. Then they go down to the mouth of the creek, which they call Thibert Creek now, named after the great discoverer, and they wing dam, which means they cut off the current and they wing dam the current around this dam, and they work in behind the wing dam. They average from 5 ounces to 11 ounces per man for the rest of the summer and the rest of the fall. Now, really the rest of the fall. It's astonishing. These guys are making, in a day in some instances, what they'd make in a whole year. In a whole year, because the average wage is about $25 a month in that era, and they're making 4 times 15, $60 a day, and if they have 11 ounces, they're making more than that. They're making about almost $200 a day. Astonishing.
And it's in gold. I mean, it is in gold, and here they are, 4 or 5 of them only, in this whole undiscovered country, working an entire season with nobody knowing anything about them.
That's right, except there is a guy holed up just below Buck's Bar, and this is Captain Billy Moore. And the Flying Dutchman says, and I think he was told, there's not any proof for this, but I believe he was told on the way back or the way down to Victoria by McCullough that they were investigating some country north of Buck's Bar. So he decides he hasn't seen them come back, and he's a very, very shrewd man. He takes his 2 sons, John and William, and they go up the Tamzilla River, which is a different route to this lake.
That's the route that McCullough and Thibert came down on. So that's an indication he talked to them.
I think that's right. He was told by McCullough. They go up there. They hit a creek at the bottom part of the lake, trending from the west, of course. Staggeringly good ground. Absolutely unbelievable. And they're just speechless. Absolutely speechless. There are only 3 of them.
So there's Captain Billy Moore and his 2 sons.
They stake a discovery
pulling gold
claim.
out of there, the same pans and pans of it.
And just north of them on Thibert Creek are the group of French Canadians.
But they don't know about one another.
That's right. And these guys all want to keep it to themselves. So the Moors, they have the discovery claims, and they're taking out a terrific amount of gold. In fact, in that first year, they averaged 200 ounces a week, which is 2.5 pounds a day. 2.5 pounds. They averaged that. So some days they get 5 pounds, some days they get a pound. But that's what they were averaging. And they all want to keep it to themselves. But here are about 2 dozen miners sitting down there in Buck's Bar, and they get together every night after they're washing gold, and they're not getting much. They're getting a few pennyweight a day each. And they're saying, hey, Thibert went up north, and he hasn't come back. And Billy Moore and his sons went up north, and they haven't come back. Well, they decide overnight they're gone the next day. It's getting late in the season, but they're gone. And they stream onto these creeks, and sure enough, they sniff out gold. There's just no way you can keep it to yourself. And pretty soon, the 24 or 30 miners up there are strung out along 2 creeks. The second creek now is called Dease Creek. That's the one discovered by Moore. And the first one, of course, is Thibert. And they get the best of the ground.
And this is still all in 1873, and it's still only 24, and nobody's told.
Nobody's supposed to tell. But, Mike, you can't keep it to yourself. And what happened is somebody let a word loose, maybe they're one of the stern wheeler captains, and before you know it, the word is spread to the Amanika, it's spread to the Kootenays, it's spread to the Caribou, it's spread to every other placer gold area in British Columbia. And everyone's raring to go, but it's too late in the season. So these 24, 25 miners, maybe 30 maximum, have the ground to themselves until freeze up. And boy, do they make the best of it. And they do extremely well. So 1873 ends, and 1874 comes, and with the spring, as soon as the snow's off the ground, the miners start stampeding, streaming into these two creeks, and before you know it, there aren't 30 miners there, Mike. There are 1,600 miners there. And every available piece of ground is taken up on Dease and Thibert, and some of them still are doing well, but there are newcomers coming in all the time. Yeah. And one of these newcomers is an absolutely fascinating guy. His name is Henry McDames or Harry McDame, either name. He was a mine finder. He'd been a mine finder. He was a black, very interesting black miner in the northern gold fields, and had come up from the States. And he'd been there. He'd discovered Lauren Creek, which is a tributary of the Skeena. And then later on, he was one of the first men into Germanson River in the Amanika country in 1870, and he's always out on the edge of the frontier. He comes in, sees that both of these creeks are heavily staked, doesn't see any room for Harry McDame. So what does he do? He heads north, and he goes down the Dease. And as every good prospector does, Mike, he pans as he goes along. Every creek he comes to, he checks. He can guess the weight in the pan. He knows how much a good pan is and how much a poor pan is. And he pans, and he comes to another river, well, actually a big creek coming in from the west, and he looks at this, and he pans the mouth, gets encouraging colors. Not spectacular, but encouraging. Now, the other creeks both had good colors at the mouth. This one doesn't have as good colors at the mouth. But he goes up about half a mile, gets better colors, coarser gold. Goes up another half mile, gets coarser gold yet. Goes up several miles, runs into bonanza ground. And the creek eventually becomes known as McDame Creek. He goes back to Laketon, which is a little village down there that's on Dease Creek, and forms the Charity Company, by the way. And the gold on this creek is even coarser than the gold in the other two creeks.
As we mentioned before, when you're talking coarser, you're just meaning the nuggets are bigger.
Oh, the nuggets are spectacular.
Not of poorer quality, just bigger.
Just more of them. A little spotty. This creek's a little spotty. So you have a trinity of creeks. You have Dease, then up the lake you have Thibert, and then beyond the lake you have McDame. And these are the three great golden creeks. They're not the only ones, but they're the three great creeks of the Cassiar district.
Now, did any towns form on these at all? Or?
Sure. And one is I just mentioned was Centreville, and that's on McDame Creek, and then there's Laketon, and that's on Dease Creek. Yeah. So Centreville and Laketon and Sylvester's Landing, but that really doesn't count too much. And they're small towns, and they're really governed by the business elite. And these are the guys who follow the gold rushes every time there's a gold rush in an area, and they're not going to mine the creeks, they're going to mine the miners. So you have the storekeepers, and these guys are the restaurant owners, and they're both usually. They come in, and they charge $2, Mike, $2 for one meal. Black beans, bread, and coffee. Now, that's 15 cents.
I've got something right here. This is, you showed me this before, but it's just such a neat idea. Yeah. This wonderful little piece of metal represents how much gold? This is...
Well, that would be over a pennyweight at that time.
Okay. And it says $16 per ounce. So this is then worth $1. $1.
That's what it says right on it.
Okay. So then the storekeeper would just take this, and he'd put it in his gold scales like that, two of them, and he'd say, fill this one up with gold.
And you get your meal.
As soon as it balanced out, you got your meal.
You get your meal. And the reason it's $16 an ounce is because that's the finest of the gold. Sometimes it'd be $18 an ounce, sometimes $14 an ounce, sometimes $15 an ounce. But they figured out how pure the gold was at each creek. So this was a creek that carried $16 an ounce, and that would probably be very similar to McDame Creek.
And that would be at every restaurant, in every store, and that was the coin of the realm, the gold dust, the gold nuggets.
You didn't use coin. Everybody weighed by gold, and if you wanted 4 drinks, you had to throw that in, and he'd say, okay, here's 4 drinks. That'd be the saloon keeper. 2 bits a drink, well watered down. So they were making a handsome profit. And if the storekeeper didn't get them, and the restaurant owner didn't get them, and the saloon keeper didn't get them, who did get them? Well, the tin horn gambler.
Right? Yeah, of course.
Okay,
right
they'd be working from a stacked deck, or they'd be working from a compound deck, or any other way, and they would strip the miners of a fair share of their winning. But these guys were making spectacular amounts. Just absolutely spectacular amounts. And, you know, it wasn't the end of it, because some of the nuggets off that creek, Mike, were staggering. There was a guy called Alfred Freeman, 1877. He's on the creek, and he, looking at the end of his sluice bucket, there's a big boulder there. He picks it up and throws it away and says, "That's pretty heavy." Goes back and looks in the pile of tailings and picks up the boulder, looks at it. Solid gold. It's about this size, 73 ounces. The biggest nugget recorded in British Columbia. It wasn't the biggest nugget, and I won't tell you that story, but it's the biggest nugget recorded in British Columbia. And you have all sorts of individuals there, Mike. You have a guy called Black Jack Smith, whose name was Nehemiah T. Smith.
Nehemiah.
He has a nickname, and it's Black Jack Smith, okay? And then you had a guy called William Latham. Now, William Latham's the name he goes by is Dancing Bill.
Dancing
So
Bill.
you have Black Jack and you have Dancing Bill. And there was a guy they thought was Russian, and he really wasn't Russian, and his name was Pete Kargatich. They called him Peter the Great. So you have Dancing Bill and Peter the Great and you know.
Dancing Bill,
Sure.
and all of these people.
Sure. And interesting thing, because Latham, Dancing Bill, is dying in about 1880. And he says, you know something? He said, and there are a couple of miners gathered around listening to every word he's saying. He said, you know something? He said, I don't really mind dying. He said, that doesn't bother me. He said, what really bothers me, he says, is that I can't outlive Black Jack Smith. That really annoyed him.
Now, when you say they were all listening to every word he said, hoping that some secret would escape his lips as he expired about the location of the gold.
Oh, sure. But, you know, these guys were a strange bunch, but they had good company. And there were a lot of others there. There were guys like Vital Laforce, who was one of the...
Now, is that his real name? I've heard his name before, and what a name. I mean, it says it all.
Lots of French-Canadians in the northern part of British Columbia. You'd be amazed. A lot of the mine finders were French-Canadians all through British Columbia. Yeah. So Vital Laforce is there, a guy called Christie is there, and Christie's very interesting, too, because what they do, they dig a tunnel. They find indications of an old channel. And they dig a tunnel between Snow Creek and Quartz Creek. These are tributaries, I think on the north side. Yeah, they would be on the north side of Macdanne Creek. I'm trying to remember.
Yeah.
And because I've been there, of course. And they come into what we call a lost lead, which means very, very heavy coarse gold. They followed in by tunneling. And the longer they tunnel in, the coarser it gets. They can't believe it. There are nuggets of 1 ounce and 8 ounces. Steady. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them, Mike. This is bonanza ground. This is lead gold par excellence. And they followed in for hundreds and hundreds of feet, and they're mining from, what, about 135 ounces a week to 400 ounces every week. It's staggering. Small company suddenly runs out, just like that. That run stops dead on nose.
Well, I mean, this has happened before, so something cut at another river or a glacier or something.
Yeah.
The lead's got to be able to be picked up somewhere else.
If it exists beyond that. And you don't know, because people have tried to look into that and say, gosh, if we can only find the lost Christie lead. And there are miners who spent a long time looking for it. I think it's probably half a mile away or 2/3 of a mile away. Now, it may not be, but I'm inclined to think it is. So when you get into that sort of speculation in the mining area, you can spend 20 years looking for it, and some absolute greenhorn can find it in a day. Now, that's the lottery of chance you have. And, you know, it wasn't the end of the discoveries in this area. There was another little creek, really fascinating creek, which yielded extremely well for a number of years. And this was discovered actually in 1878. And Thibert Jr., who was really a younger brother of Henry Thibert, decided to strike out with a guy called Defoe and a number of other French Canadians. So they get together, and they form a band, and they go up the west side of Dease Lake, and they go beyond that, and they come to a river called the Canyon River. And it's very, very tough going. It's called the Canyon River for a reason.
Good reason.
You know, it tends to have perpendicular walls, which doesn't make it easy going. You've got to go on the water usually, and it's tough slugging. So they get about 6 miles up the Canyon River, and these guys have a little parlay, and they say, look, we've gone far enough. 6 miles, no indication, very, very fine gold. And Defoe is the guy who comes to the fore, and he says, John Defoe says, I think there's gold farther up. Will you guys bear with me? So they do. They go up they branch off onto the west fork of the canyon, and they go another 6 miles. They stop again. They say, look, and 6 miles takes, this is days, you see. This isn't just a few hours. It's not like driving. You're carrying all your equipment. You're carrying your gold pan. You're carrying your grub. You're carrying everything. And after 6 miles, they say, look, we've had it. So Gain prevails. Very persuasive speaker. He prevails upon these guys to go farther up the creek. They go for another 7 miles. Finally, they stop. They says, this is it. We're turning back. They start to turn back. He says, please, do one thing. Try one more creek. One more creek. They go on one more creek, and much to their absolute astonishment, they hit bonanza gold on a creek that they later called, of course, naturally, Defoe Creek,
of course,
after the guy who convinced them to go. And the nuggets on Defoe Creek are just as good as the nuggets in every other creek, except it isn't quite as big a gold field.
Unbelievable.
So this is the beginning, and of course, what happened, of course, in this rush is that by the late 1870s, gold doesn't grow like potatoes, so the gold is more or less declining in volume. And they take out, by the way, Mike, in those first 6 years, they take out about $3 million worth, and that's about $15 an ounce. That's 200,000 ounces of gold. 200,000 ounces of gold. That's tons of gold, Mike, absolute tons. And so these are the high years, and after that, of course, the Chinese come in, Mike, and the first headman disappears in that country. There was a sign tacked up on a tree, no Chinese in this area. And the first headman, who was a very brave Chinese, went in there. He was gone. They never found his body, never found where he disappeared. But they take over the creeks, and by 1880, half the creeks are being run by the Chinese, who are excellent miners indeed.
Okay, got to take a break here. What little time we have left, we'll tell you about another. Don't go away. Ghost towns, as we said, it wasn't over in the late 70s. It happened one more time this century.
That's right. 1925, two prospectors, Ford and Grady, found good gold on Dome Creek and Wheaton Creek and Gold Pan Creek, east of Dease Lake. Very, very good gold. Still working in there today.
Gosh, I couldn't believe it. Macdanne and Thibert, Dease. The memories clicking over, I tell you. That's our story for today, the wonders of the Cassiar district of British Columbia in the 1870s. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back again next time with more gold trails and ghost towns. We'll see you then.